computer. All right.
Patty's here. Hi, Patty. Yay.
It is about 9:07, and we'll get this meeting underway. And this is usually Jackson Snyder here, but he is flying halfway around the world to the Philippines. So we'll pray that that goes well, that his experiences there, on the way there, and on the way back are completely blessed, and that he is able to do good things over there. Tonight we have Adam Drissel with us. He wrote a book, The Mystery is History. And we've already been talking about it a little bit for those of us who have been here since about 9. And Adam, you wanted to do a Q&A type thing, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead.
If you want to open up in prayer, I'd like to either like you to do that, or I can do that, whichever.
Okay. Yeah, I'll open up in prayer.
Okay, great.
Abba Yahweh, we thank you for this time that we have together, this meeting to answer questions, to understand. It says that we should reason. Scripture says we should reason, to know the truth, to understand things, to understand how people see things. We thank you for this time, this opportunity to do that. Anoint this time, that there be no purposeful misunderstandings, that people see what is being said and take it for what it is. I pray that all of us here are here to do just that. In Yahshua's mighty name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, anybody got any questions?
I'm going to show my face because I talk with my hands, so.
All right. Well, do you know ASL? That's
I do not.
Sign language.
But if I go like this, then that's, it's important to see that.
Oh, what was this that you did?
Just like, come on, you got to understand this.
Oh, okay.
Wringing his hands.
Yeah. Sorry, I guess I should have.
Oh, pleading for understanding. I got you.
There you go. So, I mean, if there's, I'd like to do an FAQ because I'm not sure how much time you guys actually get to ask just open questions for whatever.
Till about, I think this will go, we can go till about 10:15, 10:20 tonight. So, but we haven't had, you were on a couple, it's been the better part of a year ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
And that was not exactly a Q&A. It was at the end where you got to ask, where we ask some questions. So, who's spinning something? That's pretty neat.
That was me on my table. Sorry, it made this sound.
That's okay. Yeah. So, does anybody have any questions to get started, or do you have something, Adam, that you would like to say that might, any preliminary type information that would be important for us to know?
Well, I kind of, for some other people that joined, I can basically say the same, my main history on this.
Okay.
I came from a belief that most of the prophecies in the scriptures were not yet fulfilled, and we were still awaiting something to come in the future. And I saw that as, again, something that was just passed down from the normal tradition that gets passed through the church. And I had heard here and there, and in fact, I had heard from Jackson when he joined our feast several years ago about the more details about the preterist view or the fulfilled view or historical view or name your whatever. And it was hard to swallow, especially at that time. And Marcille had then subsequently, before she had moved to where she is now, she was fellowshipping with us here locally, had presented something that was basically snippets from Revelation with a historical or fulfilled view. As kind of expected, the presentation wasn't welcomed by most, because this is a very difficult topic to discuss. And however, for me, I'm not opposed to taking anything that's against the grain per se. So what I decided to do that time, I didn't actually give the topic the justice due to it prior to then. So I had to sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to read Josephus's Wars. I just have to do it. Otherwise I can't I can't explain for myself whether this is, truth or bubkiss. So once I did that, in the process, the way that my mind works, I took notes, and my notes turned into an organized study, which then erupted into a book. And the more that I read, the more I was absolutely astounded as the parallels. So that's where I came from.
So, this is Liz.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Adam. No, I have to say, hi, Allison. The Sacred Femininity Hod, I'm looking at that going, who's that? That's me.
Okay.
I was in the meeting last night, and I forgot when I came on Zoom that was still showing up as my Zoom room. Oh, that's so
Okay.
funny. So anyways, that's what that is. That's who that is.
Hi, Liz.
But I do have a question.
Okay.
And Adam, I really appreciate all your research, and I know you've written in massive book, but I have to say I have not really read it cover to cover.
Okay.
So and you probably might answer this, but it's just because, for the sake of time, if I can get the cliff notes, so to speak.
Sure, of course.
Right? But so because I kind of know, and I was there when you were there a year ago, and I kind of know basically a lot of what you guys are saying, and I don't totally disagree with a lot of it. I mean, really. There's absolutely, historical. I don't think as an Ephraimite, really, Christian, that they really have any deep empathy or really understanding what it meant for Jerusalem to fall, for Israel for Judah to go into exile. I mean, that was just huge. And I don't think we've ever been taught in the church that really what that meant spiritually for them as a people, as the house of Judah, and any of that. So I think it's really good to really, make people focus on this. It's history, because it's real, and it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. There's no doubt about it. But I guess so I can kind of put in my own mind, put that in the context also of Deuteronomy 28. I mean, in terms of total fulfillment, that, and I believe that's why a lot of these scenes, people just saw it coming down the pike. Judgment was coming. The gig was up. They were going into exile. I don't think it took too much of a rocket scientist to figure out that the sins of Judah, and when they saw Yeshua, what had happened, that they crucified, their own Lord of glory, that it was done. So I can see a lot of it coming, the full weight of all the curses coming upon Judah in that generation. Boom, done. They're exiled like the northern kingdom. But I guess my question is this is moving into the rest of the book, into chapter 20, 21, the 1,000 years, the New Jerusalem. What do you do with that? I mean, how do you morph into the end of the age? If you don't have a dual fulfillment, sort of, if you don't have an end of the age where the wicked truly will be no more, as Enoch says, what's your wrap-up scenario?
Right. Okay, good question. So you jump straight to the end of the book. That's always a good place to start. That's like that movie, what is that? When Harry Met Sally, he always reads the last page of the book before the beginning. So first of all, let me say that
right? Isn't that exciting? Somehow.
Yeah, there you go. So let me say that I appreciate, first of all, that you use the phrase 1,000 years as opposed to millennium, because that does make a difference. That's actually pretty significant, believe it or not. Because the numbers that are found in the book of Revelation are very symbolic, and the number 1,000 is used several times, whether it be a multiple or the 1,000 years that are spoken of. So as a high level, let's just remember one thing that's very important is the phrase 1,000 years as it relates to any specific period of time for the end is only used twice in the entirety of the scriptures, the canonical scriptures that we know of. And both of them happen to be within about 2 verses of each other in Revelation chapter 20. So a lot of the ties that most people try to make between Zechariah 14 and the temple that's in Ezekiel and all these other things, between that and some millennial kingdom, can't be made from a scriptural perspective, in my opinion, because there is no 1,000 years mentioned elsewhere. So the question is, what exactly is this 1,000 years? In my opinion, it is not intended to be a literal time frame. There's a lot of build up to this in the book, which is I'm gonna try to sum it up. So if I skip past things that leaves you even more confused, then that's not my intention. But I can't obviously go over all the pieces of information. I will say this. I'll give you some examples. When when Yahweh says in the scriptures that he owns cattle on 1,000 hills. I believe that's in Psalm 50. Clearly, we all know that he owns the cattle that's on the 1,001st hill. You know, so it's not that number right there isn't limited to 1,000. It's saying that he owns cattle on every hill, right? In addition, you have scriptures that say he blesses the 1,000th to the 1,000th generation of those who honor him and keep his commandments. You know, clearly the 1,001st generation would also be blessed as a result of their obedience to those commandments. So these numbers aren't intended to be something that's literal, and that's one thing that most people look for is this 1,000-year reign of Messiah. And to be honest with you, I don't know how it's supported other than just a traditional belief. So from a scriptural perspective, let me pull it up really quick because I want to have it in front of me. So I'm just going to read from Revelation. So Revelation 20 to me is a tale of two judgments. And both of the story, this is written obviously the entire book is written in a very apocalyptic way, but it's also very novel-like. I don't even know if Marcia would help me with the word about how to make that an adjective. But in Revelation 20, verse 1, I saw an angel come down out of heaven, having the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, who deceived the whole inhabited earth, and bound him for 1,000 years. He cast him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it over him, that he should deceive the nations no more until the 1,000 years were finished. After this, he must be freed for a short time. And that little phrase, that first three verses there, leaves you with this pause, that's it? Like, where's the rest of the story? What's happening? Okay, he's freed for a short time, but what's going to happen when he comes back? So there's this pause. There's this, stopping point that's right there, parenthesis, so to speak, in the text, where John then goes on to something that's happening parallel to this from a time perspective, but he wants to give the beginning part of this story as well. Verse 4, it says, I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given to them. I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Yeshua and for the word of Elohim, and such as didn't worship the beast, nor his image, and didn't receive the mark on their forehead and on their hand. They lived and reigned with Messiah for 1,000 years. Now, verse 20 is very interesting. At the beginning of virtually every version of the Bible that you will have, it has the sentence, the rest of the dead didn't live or come to life until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Now, that first sentence is not found in the earliest manuscripts that we have of the book of Revelation, which is very telling and very powerful, because when you remove the rest of the dead didn't live until the 1,000 years were finished, you're almost altogether removing the concept of a second resurrection altogether, because there's nothing else that even hints at a second resurrection of sorts.
So can I just interrupt? If I were to get your book, would you have all this footnoted where you could, the document of the text? Because, maybe one text omitted it, but if you documented that, like, the earliest text, the Synoptics, all these things don't have that verse, like it's heavily footnoted. I have
screenshot of the actual text itself outlined in yellow. Well, it's black and white, so it's outlined, and I have the references that you can find of anything online. I'm really big on references, so if you don't find a reference in my book, then let me know and I'll put it down.
Brother Drissel, can you put in the chat a link to your book again so everyone can?
Yeah. Let me
Awesome
do that.
stuff.
Remind me to do that before we get off, because I have to find it.
Okay, we'll do.
You.
Okay, so going back, you're basically asking, what about the end? So I think that this is what most of the people end up getting to. I think the 1,000 years is symbolic. I think that the New Jerusalem is completely symbolic. Although I do believe that there is a Jerusalem that is in the spiritual realm. Again, a lot of terms that are utilized with this sound very sci-fi, but for lack of a better term, I'm going to have to use things like realm or whatever. I think there is a kingdom that is around us. I mean, we have evidence of there being things that are invisible in the physical world that were revealed to people, in the physical. The servant of Elisha was able to have his eyes open to see the armies of Yahweh surrounding them. And suddenly he knew, you know what, we're going to win this battle. That's not going to be a problem. So there's a kingdom around us, no doubt. Now, the New Jerusalem, in my opinion, is an actual city that exists in the spirit realm. But in relation to what John is describing it, where everyone's considering, is this something that we're going to see come down from heaven, descending as this cubic city that's going to be, streets of gold, and that there's going to be 12 foundations that are visible that have the apostles' names on it. All those things are, in my opinion, symbolic of the assembly, the church, the ecclesia. And when you read the descriptions of it, and I have all this again detailed in the book, it all points to John giving this very beautiful apocalyptic description of the assembly. I mean, for instance, a perfect example is the fact that the city itself, the New Jerusalem, is called the Lamb's Bride. Well, surely our Messiah is not going to marry a city, right? He's going to marry a bride. He's going to marry a people, right? The clothing and the garments of the bride are white and pure, and they're related to the righteousness of who? The saints, right? The people. What was the assembly built upon? It was built upon the foundation of the 12 apostles. What's made up in the assembly is made up of kings and priests, and the 12 stones that are described, the colors of them are identical to the ones that are in the Septuagint for the high priest breastplate, right? So a lot of these things I think are illustrative. So when all this comes to a head, the end to me, if the question were to be asked, what still has yet to come, my simplest answer to that question would be Revelation 20 verses 7 through 10, where it speaks about this after the 1,000 years, which the 1,000 years is a period of time that is just intended to be a lengthy, indefinite period of time. That has not yet come to pass. And this battle of Gog and Magog that has yet to come to pass is paralleled in Ezekiel 38:39. And I think that at that point, after that, when the devil is destroyed and thrown into the lake of fire of non-existence, then heaven will merge with earth, for lack of a better term. Does that answer your question at all, Liz?
Well, that tells me sort of your perspective.
Okay.
Can I, have a little a discussion about some of the way, what I just think is interesting, how, we all have different gifts and calling. Now, I am very, very, very focused on what I consider to be the mysteries. Paul talks about, even though I understand the mystery and can understand prophecy, there is a level in the scriptures. I don't know if you're familiar with parts of the Sud level, the deep level that he encrypted, encoded what the allegorical language is really saying. And like you just used the word cattle, which is because what I've been able to learn, so I spend a lot of time with these words, cataloging them and how they're used by the prophets so cattle is really men, rams are women. So he says in the end, if you need I have cattle on 1,000 hills. God's really saying, look, I got tons of people that have money. My people, he doesn't want to have cattle up. It's not like he's going to go get a cattle and sacrifice it and give you or sell it. He has people. These are a lot of these words like trees or people, people groups like there were. So you have to kind of figure out, they're very poetic in their language. They use a lot of concrete imagery to define spiritual realities and their realities. I mean, this is why the poetry, they're just very creative, poetic, concrete kind of writings. But so I would just say, but I want to know your timeline. So if you're saying that there's no quote unquote 1,000 years, like the way I understand things, a lot of times there's an archetype. So you take the week, the 7 days. I mean, it's a really prettiest, and we have a Sabbath. We do it every 7th day. We are to rest, and it most people have an understanding, and you can pull it out of the scriptures. I think of this this sabbatical, this Sabbath rest on the seventh day, which would parallel to a lot of people can see as the millennial reign, right? 1,000 years. So in your opinion, where are we on a time frame? I mean, if you were to do chronologies, do you believe that we're at the end of a 6,000 years of Adamic history, and that, you know, you can see, I mean, you can see the other side, how people can put the 1,000 years in there very easily, have 7,000 years, have the week.
Right. Okay. So I'll say this. I don't believe in the concrete nature of a fixed 7,000 year period for all of history of mankind. In fact, in my personal opinion, based on the most accurate chronology I can find, and I've gone through from creation to now, we're already well into the seventh time. So into the 7,000 group of years or whatever. So I would say I do not deny under any circumstances that the Sabbath is symbolic of something. In fact, the book of Hebrews speaks directly of that. It is symbolic of a rest that is to come in the future. However, I believe that rest is intended to be one that's eternal. It doesn't last for 7,000 years and then end. It's something that we go, and as soon as we enter into that rest, we are in that rest. We rest from our labors. It's not 7,000 years and then it goes away and there's another whatever. So I don't want to say that, I can't say that it's completely wrong because I don't have anything to come out, but I can say that I don't see any specific evidence directly within the scriptures to say that there's 1,000 years per thing. Now, a lot of people will interpret a passage in the book of, I think it's 2 Peter, that says 1,000 years, there's 1,000 years as a day. He's not, what is it? You know what I'm talking about, right?
There are actually, to tell you, there are 5 scriptural witnesses, 2 in the quote unquote canon, and there's many in extra biblical texts of 1,000 years is a day, and a day is 1,000 years. That is an archetype. That is a period of time that we can pretty well establish. So to say it's very easy for people, you know, these 1,000 years could be, it's like a day, the Sabbath day, and that fits in with the typology. I mean, you can't, it's there. I mean, it's there. So I'm just curious to where you thought we were in the...
Right. Well, to answer your question directly, I would say that we are in the 1,000 years that relate to what Revelation is speaking of. As it relates specifically to an archetypal thing that you're speaking of, I don't have an answer to that. I would say that all of the passages I've seen that relate to something about 1,000 years as a day is not intending to set out a precedent of literal days to literal years. It's intended to be a description of a period of time that to exemplify, how do I say this? Like how it's used in 2 Peter is to put in people's minds, like, you know, to him 1,000 years is as a day. So he's not rushing past. He hasn't forgotten about you. He hasn't forgotten about his promises, about his covenant. He hasn't forgotten about the things that he was going to fulfill. So, you know, don't fret. But immediately after that, in the book of 2 Peter, it goes on to say that the times were near that those things were coming to pass. So,
right, and I understand. But I will say, you know, he did say to Adam, you know, in that day, and we can get off of this topic after, but in that day you will surely die. I would argue for the fact that 1,000 years is a pretty, because there's a lot of ways they use time, like, you know, times and a half a time. There's a lot of coded ways or a little more encrypted ways. Yeah. It's not so literal per se. They are a little more, they have their ways of designating time, the 70 weeks. These
right.
are, you know, so I'm just saying, I kind of, but I wanted to ask you another question. I don't mean to monopolize. If anybody else has another question, let them go. And then nobody knows how. Go ahead.
All right, you guys have 5 seconds to talk before Liz gets going again, so hurry.
I'll turn my mic on.
Hey, Scott, do you have anything? It's good to see you here. All right, Liz.
Oh wait.
Okay.
I have a second. What do you think about the reference in the Epistle of Barnabas about what day we're in.
Yeah. So I have mixed views myself on the Epistle of Barnabas, and I'm going to be honest and say I haven't done enough study on it to make a full conclusion on it. So I'll give you that as much as possible. But in my understanding and what I've read of it thus far, there are certain things in it that I disagree with. That's not to say that, again, I'm this master of understanding the canon backwards and forwards, or what's supposed to be considered scripture and what's not, or even whether everything that's in the epistle has to be scripture for some of it to be accepted. But I would just say that it's the archetype. Again, it's one of those things, like, I don't have any way to prove it, but I don't have any way to disprove it. So it can be stated that's an archetype and whatever, and that very well may be true, but I can't provide any evidence directly in support of it outside of what one of the passages say. Now, something like the 70 weeks or the 77s, I can look back in history and I can give you exact information as to how that relates.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And I am clear on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
But
I wish I could answer your question about the epistle.
It's all right. It's all right. I kind of get what you're saying. It's sort of, I'm getting just wait. It will come, basically, right?
Right. Like, yeah. I mean, let me pull up the passage. What you Scott put it in there. 2 Peter 3.
Yes.
Thanks for putting that in there.
He's
Scott.
awesome. Thank you.
Then there are Psalm 90 he mentioned, and somewhere in the Epistle of Barnabas, was it chapter 15?
Yeah. I remember seeing it there. So here's the one that's always quoted by the futurist belief to say, oh, this hasn't happened yet because we're looking for 1,000 years and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, whatever. It says, but do not forget this one thing, beloved, that one day with Yahweh is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. But immediately after that, it defines what that is intended to mean. It says, Yahweh is not slow concerning his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient with us, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And then it continues through these things, and at the very beginning of that chapter, where people neglect to go back and read, it's talking about these mockers that were to come in the last days. And the author of this epistle, which I do not believe was Peter, the author of this epistle stated the rest of this thing that they were living in those days because the mockers had come. So regardless of whatever this 1,000 years is he's referring to, in the opinion of this writer, they were in the last days, and this 1,000 years was being used, in my opinion, as an illustration of the patience that the Father has in contrast to those that mankind has.
That's very good. That's a little different interpretation than what I have from the Epistle of Barnabas. What he says is, it is between, I believe, the 4th day and the 5th day, light and life. So you would have several more days to go before
It was all wrapped up.
Yes, before the end. Thank you, Gov.
Could I speak to that too? I was just looking
Sure.
at
Sorry.
that verse, and if you're talking about Barnabas 15, verse 4, I know that whenever I read things about all things brought to an end, such as it says here, that my mind directly goes to the end of, it used to go to the end of the way the world is now as we know it. But could this not be referencing the same thing that happened in the book of Revelation when it says, therefore, my children, in 6 days, that is, in 6,000 years, shall all things be brought to an end? Could that not be what all things? Could that not be the end of the age, such as you've presented in your book that has happened? I mean, does that have to go out into the future? I mean, it seems like that when we read other things throughout the scripture, that our mind goes to future, when the writers could be referencing the end of the new covenant or the old covenant age, or whatever, however you want to say it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because even Josephus refers to the time right at the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple as the revolution of the ages. So even he recognized that particular time period and the events that were taking place at the time as a breaking point between one age and the next. And he didn't write. I mean, he wasn't writing scripture per se. But yeah, no, I think the concept of ages in general, Marcio, is completely and totally lost in our culture here today, because it's just, we don't divide time in the way that they divided time in the past. So the question really began all of Yeshua's teachings, all of the teachings of the apostles and the letters, all pointed to this age that was supposed to come. In fact, even at the very beginning of the book of Hebrews, it actually says that in the previous ages, in previous times, he used to speak to the fathers through the prophets and so forth. But then in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, through whom he made the ages. So it's interesting that certain terms in the scriptures are used when it comes to time frames. But yeah, I mean, again, I can't speak too much to the book of the Epistle of Barnabas because I'm really not familiar enough with it to make a conclusion one way or another.
Well, thank you. Can I try to encourage Brother Paddock, who has a lot of knowledge, to come on and talk a little bit? Brother, come on. You're so smart. I've read so many of your posts. Come on, we encourage you. We love you. Come on. Say something.
We can't hear you. I'm not that good at reading lips.
Oh, he's muted, huh?
No, he's not muted.
He's got it. Give him a sec.
Scott Paddock.
Unmute. Brother Paddock, you were there just for a second. Come on. You have a lot to say. There you go. Turn up your volume. I can hear you a little. Turn up your volume.
Yeah.
Come on, we want some controversy here. Come on, turn it up. I can't hear you. A little bit higher. More.
No, you're on mute, Daniel.
I'm sorry, Brother Paddock. I still can't hear you.
I think everything's working but your mic.
Yeah. Check your mic connection.
No.
We want some different. I mean, that's the point of all this. Brother Drissel, I love what you're saying, but
well,
it's
one thing that I can offer is that we're doing Bible study, Daniel and I, and we see the immediacy of certain things that the apostles are speaking about. That is very clear.
Yeah.
There is no way that you can look away from that. While we might not, while somebody might not totally agree with what you're saying, there's no way you can say that that the end of the age that they're talking about is something that's coming soon. Would Shaul even have said something like, "Don't get married," if he knew that it was 3,000 years off?
Well, the other thing you have to consider outside of, and just shout, Scott, whenever you feel like you got your sound, and if we all go deaf, then we know you got it working. The other thing that people neglect to think about is relevance, not just immediacy, but relevance. A lot of the things that are mentioned would have no relevance if it were speaking, like you said, of 2,000, 3,000, however many years into the future, an unknown period of time. The relevance for that generation to hear the things and the answer to the question that they specifically asked Messiah: what will be the signs of your coming and of the end of the age? The easiest answer is, if it was to be years in the future, would have been like, don't worry about it. It's not going to have anything to do with you. It has to do with a generation in the past. But they were asking him about something that they felt was very close to happen. And they certainly lived their lives afterwards and preached their message afterwards with the same exact thought in mind.
Yeah, like I said, I can see that the immediacy, like you said, that in Enoch, I think it says that this prophecy is for a generation afar off, or something like that. That indicates It's not gonna come with the writing of this book, or maybe even 500 years from now, but maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years. So there are definitely ways scripturally to indicate what we're talking about, that it was distant or that it was near.
Well, from what I've been reading of some commentary on the books of the, what do you call it, intertestamental stuff,
Yeah.
right? A lot of it may have been written by the scribes of the time. Is anyone familiar with that?
No, not really.
Okay, that's a new thought. I'll have to get it together first. But they were dependent on the priests and also on the administration, the political administration of the government there, depending on who was, ruling them. And they were the people who taught the word, who taught the Torah, who most people weren't literate. These guys were literate and they spread it out, but they were conflicted because they saw the writings and they weren't turned by the changing of the politics, if that makes any sense. They were putting it in the formats that they were familiar with, like prophecies and apocalypses and things of that nature, and trying to transmit what was happening right then and what people needed to do at that time, not in some future time, at that time. And, if you get the theological, political, social thing as one group, I can see how some of these writings, like, they took Enoch and they, how Enoch is overlaid with several things. It's, all right, here's one story, here's another story, here's another story, and it's all kind of put together. And it's repetitious. But I think that these people who were writing it, the people who were the progenitors of the Essenes, they were writing a little bit in a self-time prophetic way. Does anybody think anything on that? Sorry, I'll shut up now. Thank you.
I haven't thought about that, but I do have a question for everyone else, in case, just to brainstorm, in case you're not saying you have an answer at this point, but I think that there's a general, how do I say this, problem with, I don't want to say a problem because it's not really a problem. It's more like an issue that people don't like to think about. If there's something in the scriptures, like what is the issue with seeing the majority of the prophecy in scripture fulfilled? In my opinion, and I can only give you my opinion. In my opinion, it's actually glorifying to the Almighty, and it just proves that we serve the only true one. Because you can go back in history and you can verify all of this information has taken place in recorded history. And to me, that is extremely powerful. Now, others may question, well, let me just ask it in the form of a question. Does the hypothetical fulfillment of the majority of prophecy as it relates to the end times make the scriptures somewhat unrelevant? Like, are you unable to relate to them at that point? Or what is again, I guess this is the big question, is where does the fear lie? Is it the fear of breaking away from tradition and what the tradition believes? Is it a fear by thinking that you don't have salvation? Is it a fear, that the scriptures don't apply to you? It takes you out of the context of it, and so you feel like you've been removed from your faith? I guess I'm trying to understand that aspect.
I don't think it's as much fear that I see as it is that the past 100 years have just been showing us a picture of, Yahshua coming in the clouds, and, every eye is going to see him, and that's going to be the end of all evil. And in your book, we've talked about this a little bit before, and I don't know if you have done any further study of this, but in chapter 11, you talk about progressive regeneration and how it's not taught, but used to be taught, I think, more previously. And, I've kind of thought about, especially as I'm reading books from the Middle Ages and things, about how we still see a lot of things going on that are horrific, and there are still wars and things that are happening, but compared to the state that this world has been in biblical times, it does seem as if we are moving, even with some of the recent things that we're seeing happening before our eyes, it looks like that maybe things are happening behind the scenes. And I think that's what people are most not wanting to. What I find is too that when they read your book or they study this out for themselves and look at Josephus and all of this sort of thing, they almost always say, okay, yes, I see that, because it's pretty much undeniable once you lay it out and side by side with history, with Josephus and all these other things. But then they just can't believe that this is it, that this is the end. So they think that this must happen again.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that the idea, that's a really good point.
Can I say something, Adam?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I think she's right on the money, but you asked the question is, where does the fear lie? I think, and I'm coming at this from a different angle, because I think as you look at this, I'm coming from more of a fundamentalist Pentecostal background. You look at it, it's like, okay, if everything is fulfilled, now I believe that there's some things that were fulfilled. I personally believe that Yeshua came to handle personal business with the house of Judah, and he took care of business just like he did with my forefathers in the 10 tribes. And that's why I'm sitting in front of a computer right now talking to you, because I got kicked out. My forefathers got kicked out. Judah got kicked out. Now, will he come again? I personally believe that he's going to come again, and that will be the end of evil. Okay? And he's going to clean house, and that's going to be it. That's going to be it. But I think the fear for most people is that the scriptures, revelations, the writings of the Pauline epistles, the Gospels, the Torah, things of that nature, they were a guideline. There was something to kind of keep you in check, to guide your life. If you begin the process of removing that, I think the human fear is that we will just go crazy and we will end up in all kinds of things where we can be lost.
Yeah, I think along with that, I think the big question, and Marcelo, you rung a bell there, so that thank you for that, is people look at this and they think, how can my view of it being fulfilled jive with the fact that I step out of my front door every day and look around and the world is the same, or I still see evil happening on the TV? So the answer to that question, in short, is a question. Were we understanding exactly what the kingdom of Elohim is in contrast to what we've been taught it is? So we're all taught, including myself, that we're expecting one day, like you said, Daniel, for the heavens to roll back like a scroll, and all of us somehow see this white horse with Messiah riding down triumphantly to win victory over all evil. And then boom, the kingdom is set up, right? We picture this as something that we see with our fleshly eyes, and that we see with our that's broadcasted all over the news, or pick your distribution method, but it's something that happens that he rips through the heavens to come to the earth, right? That's the typical understanding. That was my previous understanding. I can only speak to what I previously believed. What I will say to that is Yeshua's discussions regarding the kingdom of Elohim and when he was talking about it always invariably refer to something that is in the heavenlies. It is a heavenly kingdom. It can only be seen by eyes from those who are born from above, John chapter 3. You cannot enter the kingdom unless you are born from above. In the context of talking about after you're dead, after your resurrection, after your transition from this life to eternal life, those are the eyes with which you can see the kingdom he rules over. In fact, he answered Pilate's question, my kingdom is not of this world. So the expectation that most have to see this kingdom set up in the world that we have around us, I don't think is something that is going to come to pass in the way that most people are conceiving it. However, having said that, what I will say is, if my understanding is correct, the kingdom of Elohim has been established, and we have a Messiah and a king who is seated on a throne and wants to be active in what he does. He is active. He's doing things. He's a king. He has people that are his servants, that are his subjects, that go out and do his bidding. He is conquering enemies in the spirit. And what you and I need to realize is that we are soldiers of that kingdom, and that spirit that was given to us is our communication line back and forth to our king to get our marching orders, per se, about how we're supposed to go over and regenerate this earth for the Father.
So let me ask you this, Adam. So you saying that this is, and then I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
yeah,
are you saying that this heavenly kingdom that that you're talking about right now cannot be seen?
That's correct.
Not
by you or me, unless you have a vision of some sort.
Right, and I've had those, even blind. I've had them.
Well, that's good.
But my point is, will that kingdom that is not seen, will that collide or catch up with, so to speak, giving a good example, the tabernacle in the Ohel Moed?
Yep.
That, the way I understood it, was the inside of the heavenly temple that was given to Moshe on Mount Sinai. Now, in other words, what was up there collided with our forefathers. Is that going to be the same thing, or is there not going to be a collision between the two kingdoms?
No, I believe that there will be. I believe that in the end, that there still is an end to come to what we see as wickedness around us and evil. But I believe that is in Revelation chapter 20, that speaks of Satan being released, to deceive the nations once more. And again, we have to keep in mind that even when it says that Satan is bound, it doesn't say that evil is bound. And to assume that evil only exists because Satan is walking to and fro on this earth is, in my opinion, scripturally naive. I mean, it straight up says that man's heart, conceives evil.
It's continuously
right,
wicked.
And each man is turned away by his own lusts and his own temptations to sin.
And also, you got to think about this, Adam. He still has troops. He might be locked up. He might be bound.
Exactly.
But he still has forces. He still has imps, prince spirits, demons that are assigned and that work for him.
That's right. Now, there's a scriptural concept that's understood that's like in general, what you're speaking of, Daniel, which is a merge, or I guess a merge is a good way to say it, of heaven and earth. When Peter was told, typically we all read, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, right? And that doesn't make any sense. Like, how does Peter have the ability to bind something in heaven, right? Well, the interesting thing is the Greek tense of the verb there actually means what you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, meaning that it's a heaven to earth thing. What was done in the heavenlies is trickling down to the earthly. So why wouldn't it be the same with a king that's ruling on a kingdom? I mean, what good? And I, again, maybe I'm wrong. Somebody show me that I'm wrong. Write a book about it and I'll read it. If I'm wrong, if I'm not wrong about this, then the Messiah is not just up there sitting on the right hand of the Father doing nothing. He is there, active. In fact, when we read that in Acts chapter 7, when Stephen was being stoned, we see that he was not sitting at the right hand of the Father, he was standing at the fame, nor have seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations. They shall bring all your brothers out of all the nations for an offering to Yahweh on horses and chariots and litters and mules and camels to my holy mountain, Jerusalem, says Yahweh, as the children of Israel bring their offering in a clean vessel into Yahweh's house. Of them I will also select priests and Levites, says Yahweh. So the question, I think, again, that you were asking is one, and you said your name was Dennis, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Take that as yes. I just like addressing people by name. So I think the answer to your question, again, could be one based on terminology. So I am not saying that the establishment of Israel, of the state of Israel at that particular period of time, is not something that's significant historically. Okay. The question is, from a scriptural perspective, how does it relate to the people of Yahweh in Messiah, Yeshua? When Yeshua was speaking to the Pharisees, he said, destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days, right? Obviously, this was totally life-shaking to them. The temple was their thing. They needed it. They wanted it. It was their idol, for lack of a better term. They couldn't believe that it could be raised in 3 days. But he was speaking, obviously, of his body. So the question I would have is, or the way that I think about it, is that the returning of the people that are Israel, the ones that these people are that escape from this destruction that's spoken of in Isaiah 66 are sent to, that are calling all these people back from the nations, what Jerusalem are they really calling them to? Are they really calling them to the Temple Mount as we know it now in earthly Jerusalem, which is a shadow, a broken shell of what it once was in the glory of the ages? Or is he referring to them being gathered to the heavenly Jerusalem? There's often times when David, and we're reading through the Psalms now in our assembly, and I've noticed this over and over again, when David speaks about constantly dwelling in the house of the Most High, and he approaches the mountain and so forth. Well, the house of Elohim in the sense of the temple didn't exist in David's day. So I think that there's a general recognition, and I'm trying to be careful here because I don't want people to think in any way that this is anti-Semitic in any way, because I am farthest from anti-Semitic that I could possibly be. But the Jewish state as it exists now is no more set apart to Yeshua than the vast majority of other nations on this planet. I know that I'm not denying in any way, shape, or form that that land that was divided off and segmented, and that Yahweh's eye is focused on that. But the question relates to, what was his goal from the beginning to the end? The beginning, we were dwelling with him in a spiritual way, and we had no separation. Now, in my opinion, when it says, the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Obviously, Adam and Eve didn't physically die that day, right? But they did die in a spiritual sense, in that their separation was truly realized. In my opinion, them being kicked out of the Garden of Eden was being transitioned from their spiritual existence that they had, that allowed oneness, to something that was physical, that caused corruption and allowed corruption and death to come and play. And the goal of all of Yahweh's end thing is to bring the ability for his people back to get to that point. So I think after Yeshua came and the kingdom was opened, he has the death to Hades and the grave. I'm sorry, did I say that right? He has the keys to death and the grave. And so now that he has those keys, he's like, come into the real kingdom where the real Jerusalem is, where the real Mount Zion is. So I think these people that are being gathered are ones that are actually being gathered to that mountain in Jerusalem. What impact does that have on Jews returning now to Israel? That's a really complex topic that can go all the way down into, like, what are the Ashkenazis and where do they originate from? And are they really bloodline Jews that are returning there? Or are they people, who is a Jew? Who is a follower of Yahweh? Does it matter that you have Jewish blood in you? There's a lot of questions that go down that arise into that.
Brother Drissel, what do you think on that? Do you have opinions on that?
Which one?
No, sorry. Being as we may be the dispersion, do you think you have to have a bloodline, or do you think you can just be a believer? And
yeah, no, I obviously don't think you have to be a bloodline. I mean, it defeats the purpose of Gentiles existing to be able to come into the faith if you don't have the ability to be a Gentile. So I would say that as far as I know, I'm a Gentile through and through. But as soon as you join yourself to Messiah, you join yourself to Israel.
I mean, yes, I agree. And you have to be grafted in and be part of them. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there is one true vine, and you have to be joined to that vine. Now, we also read that he is the good shepherd, and he knows his sheep, right? I can't see everyone around me to determine whether they're a sheep of the Messiah. I can't determine whether everyone that's in Israel that is returning as Jews are considered sheep. I know that they're attempting to build another temple there. But that's a whole different topic that we don't really probably need to go down right now. But anyways, so my opinion on the Jewish side of things is that I believe that the way that has been made to Yahweh at this point is through Messiah. I do not, and Marcial and I have talked about this at length, and we're in agreement on this. I believe that obedience is still a requirement. You can't have faith without obedience. It's coupled with it. There is no separation of the two. Faith without obedience is not faith from a biblical definition. So I'm not a once saved, always saved, you say a prayer and you're done type of person. But I will say that the gate to which we are to enter the presence of the Father has been made very clear to me. So what relevance the reestablishment of the Jewish state has would only be as important as it relates to the prophecy I still believe needs to take place in Revelation 20. And we would need to consider how that relates to the actual people of Yahweh, which is made up of Jews, Gentiles, everyone who believes in faith. Does that answer your question at all, Dennis, or did I make it completely confusing?
Well, it's your answer. I mean, I'm a premillennialist, so it's a hard sell for me to. Of
course.
I mean, I look at verses like in Zechariah where it says Jerusalem will become a cup of trembling, and
right.
I look at what Paul said about the time of the Gentiles will come to an end, and that there's a blindness upon Israel until the time of the Gentiles. So, kind of a dispensational view. That would end with the coming of the Lord for the church, the rapture. It's very traditional, evangelical Pentecostal view, premillennial.
Yep.
To me, it's the fact that Israel as a nation is significant to prophecy and opens a door for a lot of literal fulfillments of things. So I'm just curious how. I mean, I'm respectful of different points of view. I've talked to Jackson about preterism.
Yep. What I will say is this: is that there's no, I can't prove you wrong. I can't, because there's no everything related to that particular view is, I think the words I use in my book is simultaneously something. I have it written. I wrote it down so that I don't have to remember it. So it's simultaneously perfect and indefensible at the same time. So there's no way that you have the ability to, or any other person that's pre-millennialist has the ability to prove what you're saying is correct, is true, because it's speculation as to how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, whatever. There's no way that we could say that that's the way that it's going to be, because by the very sheer nature of it being in the future, no one can say that it is going to be a particular way. Now, having said that, what I will say is that there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of believers and commentators and any number of believers, or, Christians and so forth throughout the years that have believed that the time was soon to come in their time. I mean, one of the verses in the original rendition of Amazing Grace, written in the 1700s, says, the earth shall soon dissolve like snow, the sun forbear to shine. Well, that was the 1700s. As far as I know, the earth hasn't melted since then, but to them it was soon, because they still saw it at that point in time as being something that was going to transpire soon in their future. In addition, as far as the Jerusalem being significant in today's day and age, there are people that made a lot of assumptions this year, for instance, because I think it's 70 years this year or something since Jerusalem was made a state, or declared a state. Now, first of all, let's look at two different things here. They were declared a state by the United Nations, which was formed under I don't want to get conspiracy theory like on people here, but let's just say that the United Nations is not like this holy organization that was formed under the commands of the Father, right? So what does it mean to be recognized as a nation by the world? What does that mean? So the world is telling you it's a nation, and the borders of Israel have been established by this council of people that said, oh, now you're Israel, now you're a state. Or is Israel what the Father defines Israel as? And that's the biggest point right there. How can we as mankind decide, oh, Israel exists now? Because if it's supposed to be Israel according to the scriptures, it's nowhere even close to the boundary lines, to anything like that. They don't even own the Temple Mount, legally speaking, as far as Israel's concerned. But there are people that have made, for lack of a better term, false prophecies this year with something that happened in the stars. What was it? Or September last year, that was the sign of the Virgin and the some celestial sign that took place with the sun, clothed with the sun, and all this stuff. I'm sure you guys are familiar with hearing about all that last September.
Revelation 12, I think.
That's it. Got it. Well, people neglect to see that that's a sign that would have been irrelevant to us and meaningless, because you can't see it. You can't see it with your eyes. If it's a sun where a constellation is during the day, you can't see it. The purpose of a sign that's spoken of in the scriptures, and the very words of it, are something that you can see. I'll just say that, we look around, it's typical, it's natural per se for us to look around to the earth and the things that are around us to look for fulfillments of those things. But we have to raise the bigger questions. Like I said, Israel. What is Israel? Who decides who is Israel and when Israel becomes Israel again? Yeah.
Do you subscribe to the fact that, Israel is the name that was given by Jacob, to Joseph's son? So you have, the northern kingdom, Judah. We know that it's the Jews, Judah, that's really over the land right now, and that there is a large awakening, regathering. There is definitely a move of unification of the two houses, of identifying each other.
All right. I can't speak to the legitimacy of these people's hereditary lines to know whether. I can definitely tell you that regardless of whether the people, again, this is where the history of the Ashkenazis comes into play some and how that all originated. And my friend knows much more about the history of that than I can even go into. But I can't speak to the lineage of any of the people that are traveling back there right now. The bigger question I would have is, let's just say that all of them return. And that is exactly what's happening, that it's a return of Israel and return of Judah and so forth, conglomerating upon the land of Israel proper. What does that mean from a kingdom perspective? Because from a scriptural perspective, as far as I know, they still need to see Messiah and accept him, unless I'm misunderstanding the scriptures.
No, and you and I probably agree on this, that I don't think that when it's all said and done, or I hope that all we're going to get out of this is this little plot of land over in Israel, because I live in Connecticut, so it's the size of Rhode Island, and I say I am not going to live shoulder to shoulder with the billions of people that are going to be in the new body, Jerusalem. I mean, because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. I do believe, in the sense that the earth will go back to its original owner, which is Yeshua. So,
we got you now, Scott.
Finally, I think I figured it out.
Sorry, Liz, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just kept hearing you say test.
No, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt either.
Well, do you have some questions, Scott? I just know,
Well, I don't want to take over, this is Adam's program and his presentation. I'm more of a commentator, but I see things from a more Jewish eschatological point of view. And so I disregard most of what's taught in Christianity, even though there's a lot of truths there mixed in. And so I see things from a lot of different perspective than what's normally taught or done in books or things like that, I mean, like we were talking earlier about the different ages. And so, where Christianity will say, well, that was the age of the law, or this is the age of grace, or something like that. Whereas, Jewish eschatology, was before even Christianity existed. And so they see it so much differently, as time is more relative and it's cyclical, or it's spiral, and things repeat. And so it's really important. What they say is that history will repeat itself. And so you have to learn from what's in history, because it's going to be the prophecy of the future. In other words, all history is prophecy. And that's how they view it more. They see that there's an age of time that was called tohu, and it means like void or darkness, but then they saw the age of Torah, which means instruction. And then they saw that the Messiah would come and there'd be days of the Messiah. And so there'd be 3 days for the Messiah. And, we see that the third day a lot of times in Scripture, like Adam was talking about. A lot of things in apocalyptic literature are not so literal. They're a combination sometimes of literal, sometimes they lean more to the spiritual, and it's not always one or the other. It's both simultaneous. But I've talked enough. If you have a question, I'll answer it, but I don't want to take over, because there's a lot of differences in Jewish eschatology versus Christian eschatology. Major differences.
So it's 10:18. I kind of plan, I guess I'm doing this 3 weeks in a row, so I'm a more of a question answer kind of person anyways. So unless anyone has any issues with kind of keeping it as a question answer format, I'm good with doing this again the next time we meet. I would say that if you have not read the book, I would read it if you can. Not for my own words, but for the history in it, because it's really just most of it. I'd probably say 30% of the book is a compilation of the historical works as it lays out a time.